So in regards to the situation with Notre Dame, this also strikes me odd, and it's certainly not a probability that Notre Dame makes the college football playoff, but it's a possibility, and it's a stronger possibility than it's been for probably most of the season after the loss to Cincinnati. Can we in some way imagine Brian Kelly taking an LSU job, and we're going to get an announcement in 5 days on Sunday after the conference championship games who the final four are ticketed to the playoffs? And if that includes Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, no Brian Kelly. I don't know, Ben, what the decision would be made there.
I mean, I think the precedent has been set that, Brian Kelly, when he was at Cincinnati, he was, had his team in the Sugar Bowl and obviously didn't coach in that game. I can't see that anybody at Notre Dame wants him to coach that game, the athletes included, to be honest. I mean, if you look down through the Twitter feed, at the very least, nobody's necessarily saying like, man, I'm mad about this, but everybody's like, wow. Like, and you don't just weigh in, if you're feeling really great about things, I guess. So no, I don't, regardless of what happens with Notre Dame, Brian Kelly has coached his last practice, his last game, however you want to look at it. Notre Dame, I think everybody would feel pretty fine if, Marcus Freeman or even Mike Elston, who's been at Notre Dame forever, was the interim head coach for whatever Notre Dame has left this season.
Yeah, no, especially with the way it ended. I mean, there's a bunch of reports coming out that this was totally blindsided by the staff. I mean, you have stuff coming out that there was a coach, one of Notre Dame's coaches, it wasn't named who, but he was inside of a recruit's home on an in-home visit, and then boom, he gets a text right when he leaves the house, and he had no idea. So, I mean, some of those reports are probably, are fabricated to an extent, but I really don't think this was expected. One thing I will say, though, I'm not as surprised about Kelly leaving as some are. I know we talked about this a little bit. I mean, it's more so the LSU thing. I mean, someone mentioned this in the comments, and I don't think that this is necessarily a part of it, but he did slip up and say that he wants Marcus Freeman to be the next Notre Dame head coach, just a couple months ago. There were a couple reports when he was first hired. I don't think it's actually the case, but there were a couple reports when he was first hired that one of the reasons he chose Notre Dame over LSU as the defensive coordinator was that Notre Dame was possibly going to promise him the head coaching job when Kelly left. So whether Kelly was giving Notre Dame hints or not that he might be leaving, might be retiring, it just wasn't too shocking. We've heard things over the last couple of years that it could be Kelly could be done at Notre Dame. And like I said, retiring was probably the likelihood that we thought it was, or the most likely case from our standpoint, and not, going to LSU or anybody else. But this seems to be adding up to where Notre Dame was blindsided, but at the same time wasn't 100% surprised, if that makes any sense.
So here's a question for everybody in the chat. You can leave your answer if you can come up with any, because I know the history of college football pretty well, and Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma for USC is the first blue blood to blue blood job transition I can remember anywhere, and nobody respond with Nick Saban, Michigan State, LSU. Nobody respond with Brett Bielema, Arkansas, Wisconsin. Those are some of the other responses I got on some other live streams. Those do not count. They don't qualify. The closest I could come was Mark Richt from Georgia to Miami, and I'm talking consecutive seasons, because otherwise Nick Saban's move from LSU to Alabama was separated, of course, by an NFL job for 2 years. Urban Meyer, Florida, Ohio State, that was a year off, so not back-to-back years. So this is unprecedented what Lincoln Riley is doing, and then we can have a debate about LSU as a blue blood job. I think it's on the cusp. From a traditional standpoint, probably not. But this is just unprecedented. These coaches moving from power job to power job, elite position to elite position. And maybe I'm dating myself here, but I would have never thought years ago, not that many years ago, that a coach would leave Notre Dame for any college job, let alone LSU, would not be one of the 5 or 6 or 7 that would have been listed to be a departure spot.
Go ahead, Ben.
It just wouldn't be.
But times have changed. I was and I can't remember the exact comment that I was reading as this all broke, but like, how many guys can you think of that have left Notre Dame on their own accord? I mean, there's really not that many. I mean, over the course of the last 20, 30 years, I mean, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, Notre Dame's just not a place generally where you leave, unless it's, you know, you're run out of town or whatever. Brian Kelly was at the peak of what we thought was going to be something very special, on the verge of maybe his best Notre Dame teams ever, and then he leaves. And the said, you know, that kind of adds to the I don't know what the word is, but the shock of it all. So yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, I don't need to get into a debate about, you know, how good of a job is Notre Dame or any of that type of stuff, but I mean, it's a pretty darn good job. And, you know, I don't know. Again, I'm at a loss for words because this is just also strange to me. But you know, Notre Dame is Notre Dame at the end of the day, and you know, Nathan referenced this earlier that you know, they're going to bounce back in some way or another, and it's just going to be interesting to see how it is.